hadn't, I don't believe that the Colonel and I would ever have... Well, I'll leave that alone and spare my blushes. But that's not what I was saying. Whom do you think Ahab Crowe married? You can have 10 guesses each and you would never come right, for it can't be a common name. It was Miss Jackdaw. Crowe, Jackdaw. I never heard anything like that. And if you ask the Colonel about it, he'll confirm every word I've said. Boucher, Weston. Why, that's quite commonplace in comparison. And I'm sure that's an event enough for me. Lucia gave her silvery laugh. Dear Mrs. Weston, she said, you must really tell me at once when the happy day will be. Peppino and I are thinking of going to the Riviera. Georgie broke in. You shan't do anything of the kind, he said. What's to happen to us? Ooh, very selfish, Lucia. The conversation broke up again into duets and trios, and Lucia could have a private conversation with her host. But half an hour ago, so Georgie reflected, they had all been walking round each other like dogs, going on tiptoe with their tails very tightly curled and growling gently to themselves, aware that a hasty snap or the breach of the smallest observance of etiquette might lead to a general quarrel. But now they all had the reward of their icy politeness. There was no more ice except on their plates, and the politeness was not a matter of etiquette. At present they might be considered a republic, but no one knew what was going to happen after dinner. Not a word had been said about the tableau. Lucia dropped her voice as she spoke to him, and put in a good deal of Italian for fear she might be overheard. No conosce anybody? She asked. I tablieri, I mean. And are we all to sit in the aula while the salone is being got ready? Si, said Georgie, there's a fire. When you go out, keep them there. I domestichi are making salone ready. Molto bene. Then Peppino and you and I just steal away. La lampa is acting beautifully. We tried it over several times. Everybody's tumming, said Georgie, varying the cipher. Mi so nervosa, said Lucia. Fancy me doing Brunhilde before singing Brunhilde. Me can't bear it. Georgie knew that Lucia had been thrilled and delighted to know that Olga so much wanted to come in after dinner and see the tableau, so he found it quite easy to induce Lucia to nerve herself up to an ordeal so passionately desired. Indeed, he himself was hardly less excited at the thought of being King Cophetua. At that moment, even as the crackers were being handed round, the sound of the carol singers was heard from outside, and Lucia had to wince as good King Wenceslas looked out. When the page and the king sang their speeches, the other voices grew piano, so that the effect was of a solo voice accompanied. When the page sang, Lucia shuddered. That's the small red-haired boy who nearly deafens me in church, she whispered to Georgie. Don't you hope his voice will crack soon? She said this very discreetly, so as not to hurt Mrs. Rumbold's feelings, for she trained the choir. Everyone knew that the king was Mr. Rumbold, and said charming to each other after he had sung. I like that boy's voice too, said Mrs. Weston. Tommy Luton used to have a lovely voice, but this one struck me as better trained even than Tommy Luton's. Great credit to you, Mrs. Rumbold. The grey, hungry mouse suddenly gave a shrill cackle of a laugh, quite inexplicable. Then Georgie guessed. He got up. Now, nobody must move, he said, because we haven't drunk absent friends yet. I'm just going out to see that they have a bit of supper in the kitchen before they go on. His trembling legs would scarcely carry him to the door, and he ran out. There were half a dozen little choir boys, 4 men and 1 tall cloaked woman. Divine, he said to Olga. Aunt Jane thought your voice very well trained. Come in soon, won't you? Yes, all flourishing. Swimming, said Georgie. Lucia hoped your voice would crack soon, but it's all being lovely. He explained about the food in the kitchen and hurried back to his guests. There was the riddle of the Quantocks to solve, there were the tableaux vivants imminent, and there was the little red-haired boy coming in soon. What a Christmas night! Soon after, George's hall began to fill up with guests, and yet not a word was said about tableaux. It grew so full that nobody could have said for certain whether Lucia and Peppino were there or not. Olga certainly was, there was no mistaking that fact, and then Foljambe opened the drawing-room door and sounded a gong. The lamp behaved perfectly, and an hour later one Brunhilde was being extremely kind to the other as they sat together. "If you really want to know my view, dear Miss Bracely," said Lucia, "it's just that. You must be Brunhilde for the time being. Singing, of course, as you say, helps it out. But you can express so much by singing. You are so lucky there. I'm bound to say I had qualms when Peppino, or was it Georgie, suggested we should do Brunhilde Siegfried. I said it would be so terribly difficult. Slow, it has to be slow, and to keep gestures slow when you cannot make them mere illustrations of what you're singing. Well, I'm sure it's very kind of you to be so flattering about it, but it is difficult to do that." "And you thought them all out for yourself," said Olga. "Marvellous." "Ah, if I had ever seen you do it," said Lucia, "I am sure I should have picked up some hints. And King Cophetua, won't you give me a little word for our dear King Cophetua? I was so glad after the strain of Brunhilde to have my back to the audience. Even then there is the difficulty of keeping quite still, but I am sure you know that quite as well as I do, from having played Brunhilde yourself. Georgie was very much impressed by your performance of it. And Mary Queen of Scots now, the shrinking of the flesh and the resignation of the spirit, that's what I tried to express. You must come and help me next time I attempt this sort of thing again. That will not be quite soon, I'm afraid, for Peppino and I are thinking of going to the Riviera for a little holiday." "Oh, but how selfish," said Olga. "You mustn't do that." Lucia gave the silvery laugh. "You're all very tiresome about my going to the Riviera," she said, "but I don't promise that I shall give it up yet. We shall see. Gracious, how late it is! We must have sat very late over dinner. Why were you not asked to dinner, I wonder? I shall scold Georgie for not asking you. Ah, there is dear Mrs Weston going away. I must say good night to her. She would think it very strange if I did not. Colonel Boucher too. Oh, they're coming this way to save us the trouble of moving." A general move was certainly taking place, not in the direction of the door, but to where Olga and Lucia were sitting. "It's snowing," said Piggy excitedly to Olga. "Will you mark my footsteps well, my page?" "Piggy, you goosey," said Olga hurriedly. "Goosey, weren't the tableaux lovely?" "And the carols," said Goosey. "I adored the carols. I guessed. Did you guess, Mrs Lucas?" Olga resorted to the mean trick of treading on Goosey's foot and apologizing. That was cowardly, because it was sure to come out some time, and Goosey again trod on dangerous ground by saying that if the page had trod like that, there was no need for any footsteps to be marked for him. It was snowing fast, and Mrs Weston's wheels left a deep track, but in spite of that, Daisy and Robert had not gone 50 yards from the door when they came to a full stop. "Now, what is it?" said Daisy. "Out with it. Why did you talk about the discovery of muslin?" "I only said that we were fortunate in a medium whom, after all, you picked up at a vegetarian restaurant," said he. "I suppose I may indulge in general conversation. If it comes to that, why did you talk about exposure in the papers?" "General conversation," said Mrs Quantock, all in one word. "So that's all, is it?" "Yes," said Robert. "You may know something, and—" "Now don't put it all on me," said Daisy. "If you want to know what I think, it's that you've got some secret." "And if you want to know what I think," he retorted, "it is that I know you have." Daisy hesitated a moment. The snow was white on her shoulder, and she shook her cloak. "I hate concealment," she said. "I found yards and yards of muslin and a pair of Amadeo's eyebrows in that woman's bedroom the very day she went away." "And she was fined last Thursday for holding a séance at which a detective was present," said Robert. 15 Gerrard Street. He seized Amadeo or Cardinal Newman by the throat, and it was that woman." She looked hastily round. "When you thought the chimney was on fire, I was burning muslin," she said. "When you thought the chimney was on fire, I was burning every copy of Todd's News," said he, "also a copy of the Daily Mirror, which contained the